It's a bit of a miserable, little bit of rain morning. What's the plan?
Mike, I think today we're not going to have any plan. I think we're just going to head out and see if we can pick up on any sign of any predators. It is quite an overcast morning. At least the wind has died off since the last 3 days. It's been quite windy. But yeah, like I said, we're not going to have much of a plan this morning. We're just going to head out there and see what the bush brings to us.
All right, Jaco, so what did you actually manage to find us on such a miserable day?
Alright, so we're sitting here with two Cape hunting dogs, or also known as African wild dogs. And just as we left camp, we saw a very nervous female impala all by herself, just crossing the road quite quickly. So quite interestingly, Mike then mentioned that there's probably a good chance that there are some wild dogs in the area. And as we investigated a little bit further, we saw another impala that looked quite nervous, and we started working the area, and then eventually we came across these two Cape hunting dogs. And we know this pack is only a pack of two wild dogs, a male and a female, and it's quite easy to recognize them because the female she only has one ear, which is quite unfortunate for her, but still these two do manage to survive, and we do see them out here quite often on MalaMala Game Reserve.
All right, Jaco, so with just the two dogs in this pack, do you think they're still effective hunters?
Mike, I do think they're probably not as effective as, say, for example, a pack of 8 to 10 Cape hunting dogs. But I think the reward for them by just being two dogs is if they do manage to catch something, well, of course, there's not so many mouths to share it with. And I think if they're clever enough and work together, they could still be very effective hunters. Maybe the one can kind of chase the impalas or whatever they might be after towards the other wild dog. But I think when it comes to kind of defending themselves, trying to survive out here, it's probably a bit more challenging. Also, the average size of a pack of wild dogs in this area is probably around 8 to 10 dogs, or wild dogs, sorry. So I think they do have a bit of a disadvantage, but I also think that in the future, if now we're getting into winter, it is the time of the year for wild dogs to have pups. So if they can find a nice safe spot for a den and maybe have some pups and successfully raise them, then they could in the future grow into a bigger pack and become more effective hunters.
Jaco, so you mentioned impala before. Is that kind of typical for these dogs to hunt, or what other types of animals do they catch, or what's a top limit for them?
So impalas, I would say, is probably the most sought after prey for wild dogs. They'll also go for anything smaller than that, scrub hares, warthogs, the smaller antelopes, duiker and steenbok. That can potentially also take down, say, young waterbuck, young kudus, younger, larger antelopes. But because there's only two of them, I think they are quite limited with what they can catch, as opposed to a large pack of 15 wild dogs. It's not uncommon for them to sometimes, catch, let's say, female kudus or maybe even a female waterbuck if they work as a team. But these two, probably they're a bit more restricted to something of the size of a impala. I don't think they'll be able to take down a female kudu by themselves. But yeah, they do have quite a wide variety in their prey, but impalas are, I would say, definitely preferred.
All right, and then this female now that just stood up, she's missing her one ear entirely. First of all, what do you think happened to it? Where is that ear? And why are their ears so important to them? Do you think it's going to be a problem for her in the future?
Mike, I do think it could potentially be a problem in the future. Or wild dogs in general, they have very large ears, so that's just a clear indication that they do use them quite a bit when they hunt, when they keep an ear out for predators that might be a threat to them. I think she probably lost her ear maybe fighting with another pack of wild dogs, potentially even with hyenas fighting over a carcass. difficult to say exactly, but you can see it's clearly been bitten off by some sort of predator. But it's not totally uncommon to find animals out in the wild with, so maybe an ear missing or maybe a blind eye, and still these animals sometimes do survive, obviously having a bit of a disadvantage. But I think these two, if they stick together, even the female having one ear, they could potentially become successful in raising pups and maybe regrow the pack, even though she only has one ear. I don't think it's the end of this pack just yet.
All right, Jaco, so I've heard you call them kind of number of names: dogs, Cape hunting dogs, wild dogs. Can you just explain why these animals have got such a variety of names, and what, if any, is a good name to be calling them by?
So I do believe a lot of people are not too satisfied with the term wild dog, and that's simply because they are actually very distant relatives of our domestic dogs, and people don't always like the association between domestic dogs and these African wild dogs. So they're also referred to as Cape hunting dogs, which I think is quite a good name because they are very efficient hunters, probably the most efficient hunters out here when they are in larger packs. And then also another term that people quite often use is painted wolves, which is probably also not such a bad term. I do sometimes like to refer to them as kind of the African wolf. But yeah, also they do go by the name African wild dogs.
Right, Jaco, so obviously we're quite excited every time we see these animals, painted dogs, painted wolves, Cape hunting dogs, whatever name we're going to use for them. But why are they so special? Because, we've seen them a couple of times now already in this series. So what makes them such a sought-after animal?
Well, Mike, they are, first of all, the second most endangered carnivore in Africa, after the simian wolf of Ethiopia. And the reason why they're so endangered is, first of all, because of predation. So quite often, unfortunately, the pups and also the adults get killed by lions and hyenas, other predators. And then also they need very, very large areas to roam around in and survive. And unfortunately today there's just not that many conservation areas, protected areas for them to successfully thrive and reproduce. So that's very unfortunate for them. And then also they are quite susceptible to all sorts of disease, canine distemper, which they quite often get from domestic dogs when they bite them. And also rabies is not uncommon amongst wild dogs. And because they're such social animals, if one dog gets, for example, rabies, you can quite often kind of spread it through the rest of the pack. So because of these three reasons, they are unfortunately quite endangered. But yeah, we've been very fortunate to have been seeing them on MalaMala for the last couple of days, because they don't always stick around. They do utilize parts of our game reserve, but the areas are so large that they quite often we don't see them for a couple of days.
All right, Jaco, you mentioned earlier about them denning. So just when do they den, and how many pups would they have? How would they raise them typically?
So wild dogs normally start denning in the beginning of winter, normally from, say, the beginning of June. And then when it comes to that time of the year, they'll start looking for a den, preferably a nice termite mound with a nice burrow, an old aardvark excavation. And they'll go inside of the little den and have some pups. And they can have anything between 2 and even 18 to 20 pups from one female, one litter, which is quite amazing.
Morning station, Sydney Athletes. Good morning.
But obviously the more pups they have, the more difficult it is to raise all of them. And so I'm assuming there's probably some number where it will be more efficient and more easier to raise the pups successfully. So I think also a reason why they're social is because they can have so many pups, and they do need to stick together to raise all of them. I think it would almost be impossible for a single female to raise 18 pups by herself. So that's also a reason why these dogs are so social. And quite interestingly, we just saw this female with the half ear standing up, and she definitely has quite a big belly on her, so we can assume that she is pregnant. And what we're hoping is that she'll find a nice safe den spot here on MalaMala Game Reserve. so that we can actually kind of monitor the whole process. Obviously at first when the pups are born, we'll probably give them a bit of space, and once they get to a certain age we might slowly but surely expose them to vehicles and kind of observe them and learn as much as we can. But yeah, it's quite exciting times ahead if they do decide to den on MalaMala.
Alright, Mal, I'm going to let Jaco concentrate on driving here. Just run us through what's going on.
Good morning. So we found the dogs on the road sleeping, but now they've gotten up and they are moving around. So we are just trying to keep eyes on them right there in front of us. They're just milling about in the area, not quite sure what they want to do. So we are just following them as they go.
Smell them.
Alright, Jaco, quickly, what's happening here?
Alright, so the wild dogs are just to our right here, and there's a herd of impalas not even probably 50 meters from these wild dogs. We're not sure if the wild dogs have noticed the herd of impalas. They probably smelt them because they are heading straight in this direction. So we're gonna just stay here for now and see how this unfolds.
So yesterday I asked Liam the question about the lions just lying around instead of hurtling around, catching wildebeest and zebra all over the place. Why are the dogs doing exactly that, hurtling around?
The technique that wild dogs use to catch their prey is completely different than, for example, lions. Lions use more of a stalk and ambush approach, where wild dogs, their method is more of flushing prey out, making themselves visible to the prey and then running them down. They are very efficient runners. They can run for very long distances before they get tired, so quite often they run their prey down. So they're not really, like I said, stalk and ambush predators, and the techniques that they use is completely different than lions. So this is exactly what these wild dogs are doing at the moment, trying to flush out maybe a scrub hare or a Jaco or a steenbok. So we're going to try and stick with them and see if they have any success.
So Jaco, honest question, how fun is it to drive these vehicles through the bush following the dogs at pace?
Like, it's actually not always that much fun. I mean, especially if you lose sight of them. But you have to be very careful. At the moment the grass is very long, there's lots of logs, so it takes quite a bit of concentration. It's much more ideal to follow these wild dogs through open areas where you can actually keep up with them. But yes, driving these Land Rovers in the terrain we do is a lot of fun.
On the back seat here, it's looking like a lot of fun. I've done this myself once or twice and I quite enjoyed the experience. Alright, Jaco, so you're struggling to find these dogs again. Do you think it's worth trying to keep up with them, or should we go and show the folks some other madness that we see here?
I do think so, Mike. I think it's time for us to move on. We have lost the wild dogs altogether amongst all these thickets. Very difficult terrain, also quite difficult to follow only 2 wild dogs as opposed to a pack of 10. And also we don't want to be breaking any vehicles at this point. So I think we'll rather let the wild dogs go and do their thing, and we'll continue to look for some other wildlife.